we don't expand our imagination,
justification for being what you are.
And welcome to Washington Unplugged. I'm Bill Plante. Today we take a look at the congressional investigation of Toyota, at Republican charges that Democrats were slow to investigate allegations of improper behavior by former Representative Eric Massa, and we'll talk to our own Mark Knoller, the fountain of presidential facts and figures, now an award winner. We begin with Congressman Darrell Issa, the ranking Republican on the House Oversight Committee, and I asked him how the suspension of the Lexus GX 460, which is part of Toyota, is impacting his investigation. Take a look.
Well, first of all, it supports what Akio Toyoda said when he testified before our committee, that they had made mistakes and they were going to have to play catch-up. And it's very clear that when you're playing catch-up for not having aggressively gone after what might be minor or not so minor safety problems, that it gets worse before it gets better. And I think that it's maybe a good sign when they suspend when they don't know what a problem is or how to fix it, rather than just kicking the can down the road and perhaps using lobbyists to prevent the government from acting quicker.
So you would think that this is a step in the right direction, this quick reaction?
Absolutely. You know, Japanese production lines for decades have had the ability for any worker on the line to pull a switch and shut down the line. We need to have that in every auto company. We need to have anyone who detects real potential safety risk be able to stop the line. And when a car company takes a car off of sales until they resolve the problem, it's a step in the right direction.
Well, now, of course, we know that Toyota was very slow to address the initial problems of sudden acceleration, and there have been memos, emails suggesting that they did know about it way before they made it public. And you've been trying to get your hands on some of the documents from the National Highway and Traffic Administration, and you've had some problems. What's going on?
We have, and we've been very disappointed. This started off as primarily a Republican initiative to get to the bottom of NHTSA's failures and Toyota's failures. It became very bipartisan, and the committee hearings were done in a very bipartisan fashion. Now we're seeing a tendency, well, an outright direction that if a Democratic leader asks for information, they get it. If a Republican leader asks for it, the Democratic administration, and the NHTSA particularly, is saying, well, go get your Democratic leader to ask for it. That's not the nature of how Congress has to work, particularly if, on an ongoing basis, we want to know whether the federal agencies are making the improvements they need to make over and above Toyota beginning to do the right thing.
Of course, you know that the Democrats are saying, hey, when the Republicans were in the majority, they did the same thing to us.
I wish that were true, and if it were, then I'd be going to Ed Townsend saying, I need your permission. But Henry Waxman was able to get, in an unfettered way, just about anything he wanted from the Bush administration. He was very effective, sometimes for good reason. Sometimes he did us a service. You know, no administration is right, and no bureaucracy likes to be checked. But all we're really asking for is the same level of transparency that the Bush administration provided to then ranking member and eventually chairman Waxman. But more importantly, this is an administration from the president on down that says they're going to be more transparent than the last one, that they're going to be different. They need to be different in the direction toward transparency, not away from it.
What will those documents tell you, if you get them, that they haven't already told the House Energy and Commerce Committee?
Well, they'll tell us the same thing. They tell that committee, but we'll look at them through the eyes of the party out of power. We'll look at them through the skeptical eyes who want to know, are you promising to do the right thing, or are you showing us that you are doing the right thing? And more importantly, it'll simply allow a continuity of these investigations in which we're working with the majority to try to regain the American people's trust, the trust that they can trust the safety organizations such as NHTSA to act quickly and not be snowed into delays that led to people dying.
Okay, I want to, before we go, ask you about your concern about Representative Joe Sestak of Pennsylvania being asked by the White House to get out of the primary race against Arlen Specter and being promised, perhaps, a job, maybe Secretary of the Navy. If that's true, what's unusual about it? Don't favors like this get traded all the time?
Well, there's a famous U.S. attorney, now Senator Arlen Specter, who said that Sestak should come clean, that if he was offered what he said he was offered, it is a crime, and that crime should not be covered up. So to a great extent, this is not a Republican congressman asking. It's really a former U.S. attorney, Senator Arlen Specter, who said that this should be made public, and as he said it, I think put up or shut up. But I think it's right. We need to clear the White House at the same time as we clear up this question. If, in fact, what Robert Gibbs, the spokesperson, has said is not problematic, really is not problematic, then we should get this behind us. And if there was an offer that was inappropriate, then we need to get to the bottom of that. You might remember that what started off very small as Watergate ultimately brought down a president. This is probably very small, even if it's a crime relative to the scope of government, but the longer they participate in hiding it and covering it up, the worse it gets.
Well, don't you think it's going to be pretty hard to prove who said what to whom in this kind of situation?
Well, I have a former three-star admiral and a congressman telling us that this offer was made. He said it in an unambiguous way, and he hasn't recanted it. So I would say that what we have is a smoking gun looking to figure out where the bullet went.
Okay, so in order to get that moved forward, you've got to have the cooperation of the Democrats, right?
Well, historically, special prosecutors have been brought in when we've been unable to get it. We will be calling for that, but we're going through the steps of giving the administration the time to do what's right, giving the Attorney General the time to do what's right. But we are running out of patience, and the American people and the press are running out of patience. How often does a press person ask the White House to simply tell us what you know and get told it's not problematic before the press outrage becomes so loud that they have to do something?
Be interesting to see where this one goes. Representative Issa, thanks very much for being with us today on Washington Unplugged.
My pleasure. Anytime, Bill.
And moving on, it's the saga with seemingly no end in sight. Former Congressman Eric Massa is in the news again, this time because a former staffer filed a sexual harassment complaint against him, which now has Republicans demanding a new review by the House Ethics Committee. Washington Post national investigative reporter Carol Leonnig has been on this story from the beginning, joins me now with the latest. Carol, you had a long piece this morning about this. What is the latest?
Well, the latest is Boehner's, House Minority Leader Boehner's remarks in response to our story, in which he says that this proves even more undoubtedly that the behavior that was going on in Massa's office was something House Democratic leaders should have known about. Remember, the big political kerfuffle about this is that, or question is, how could a Democratic congressman be engaged in behavior allegedly that was sexually harassing his male staff for so long without House Democratic leaders knowing about it or doing anything about it? And that is the centerpiece of a House ethics investigation that's now underway. Our story basically went a little deeper into the issue of, well, who was complaining and what were they complaining about? And what we learned was that literally weeks after Massa took office in 2009, staffers were complaining about lewd, suggestive propositions he was making to them, positions he was proposing to them of particular sex acts. Staffers were alleging that he was talking in the office like a 19-year-old frat boy about all sorts of sexual indiscretions, and it made them uncomfortable.
Wow, I bet it did. I mean, in your office or mine, or in the office of just about anybody watching this, that kind of behavior would get, you'd last about 2 seconds before you got outed to human relations and probably bounced.
Yes.
How do you get away with it in Congress?
Well said, Bill, and that's really why the Post decided to pursue this story about a congressman who has since resigned. Why was it that in a congressional office, this behavior that sounded so egregious and predatory, how could that continue for a year? And what it turns out, or at least what staffers have told us, is that they were afraid for their careers. They came to Washington to build a career and a resume, and they thought that by coming forward or stepping forward in a forceful way about this, they would jeopardize their own job prospects.
Yeah, so what's wrong with this picture? I mean, there are protections under the law in most workplaces, but not quite yet in Congress, right?
Well, the Congressional Accountability Act, a law passed in 1995, was supposed to make it illegal for members of Congress to engage in sexual harassment and to provide protections for their staffers. But what I heard from staffers was that that law and that act actually provides kind of weaker protections than for any other federal employee, so that you have to go through this sort of mandatory process of counseling and mediation that are aimed at having you work out a compromise with your alleged attacker, rather than getting some sort of satisfaction and end to the behavior or even punishment. The process is emphasizing mediated resolution rather than punishment and cease and desist.
Any suggestion that these revelations may push Congress to make the sanctions a little tougher?
We'll see. What I'm hearing on the Hill is that's like very low on their priority list. Remember, the Congressional Accountability Act was crafted by members of Congress concerned that they didn't want somebody picking into their office and how they treated their staff. So I think that's unlikely, but I think there will be a lot of arguing back and forth about how this could have gone on this long, and maybe some posturing back and forth between the parties about who's responsible for that.
Any likelihood that the Ethics Committee will take up all these new allegations?
Yes, I understand that they're conducting interviews about this same subject and trying to interview some of the people that we have talked to as well.
But I guess the uncomfortable fact that remains is that Congress really isn't comfortable with setting up a situation where its members can be publicly outed or shamed for anything.
Yes, as you've said before, you know, they make their own rules, and you know, it goes to every sort of congressional scandal of the past. The check scandal, the post office scandal. It's like Congress really considers itself above a lot of the laws that all of us have to obey. And what you find is once this comes out, then they're slightly embarrassed, and several members who find it troubling do something about it.
And they wonder why people get upset, huh? Carol Leonnig, thank you very much for your time today and for your story.
Thank you, Bill.
And finally, we bring you this week's Knoller's Nuggets. My White House colleague is being honored at next month's White House Correspondents' Dinner for his years of dedicated service, and we'll talk about that in a moment. But first, Mark, tell me about what happened today at that bipartisan meeting the president had with the leaders of Congress on financial reform.
Well, what we learned after congressional leaders came out is that there is still an enormous amount of disagreement between Republicans, congressional Republicans, and the Democrats in Congress and with the president. The president is looking for the next big accomplishment on his domestic agenda. Having enacted health care reform, he wants financial regulatory reform enacted this year. He says we can't afford to have another situation where there's an economic meltdown because of unregulated activities on Wall Street.
Yeah, well, guess what? The Republicans don't like it, right?
Yeah, you're exactly right. They sure don't like it. They're saying that what the president's plan would do would institutionalize taxpayer bailouts of big financial banks and institutions, and they won't go along with that.
So what chance do you think we have of seeing a bill get through the Senate? Who knows, right?
Well, it's just like on health care. We may not know until the last minutes of the final vote in one of the chambers.
All right, yesterday the president concluded his two-day summit meeting on nuclear materials. They got an agreement to cooperate, but it's non-binding. I mean, what does it really mean? What do you think? How do you do?
Well, it's not binding, but to listen to President Obama, it is a major historic landmark. He got the leaders of 46 other nations to agree that over the next 4 years, they will account for all the nuclear material that's loose within their countries, so-called loose nukes, and secure it within 4 years. The president made it clear that there's an enormous danger that terrorists could get this nuclear material and use it to create a bomb against the United States or any other nation.
Well, probably won't get much argument on that, but our friend Dana Milbank wrote this morning in the Washington Post that the president conducted this summit in such a closed manner that it was like being in the old Soviet Union. What do you think about that?
Well, you know, I think Dana overwrote the story a little bit. Yes, we weren't allowed to cover the actual plenary sessions in the morning and afternoon that the president held with his fellow leaders. But you know what? We're never allowed to cover those events. It didn't begin in the United States. For 30 years, whenever we go to an economic summit, the G7 or G8, the APEC international summits with Asia Pacific Rim nations, we're never allowed to cover those plenary sessions. They're always held behind closed doors, and we come to terms with it.
Well, you know what? Just allow me an editorial comment. More access is better. I'll stop there.
Well, no one's going to disagree with you, but
yeah,
certainly
really controversial.
Access is better than no access, no argument.
All right, listen, Mark, you're going to receive an award at the White House Correspondents' Dinner on May 1st, and I'm happy to tell everybody about it. It's the Aldo Beckman Award, and it's for excellence in covering the White House over a long period of time, which you've done, 35 years, and you are the ultimate repository of all facts and figures. This award is richly deserved, and I want to congratulate you. But let me just say this. I have a question for you, the question that I can never answer. What was your favorite moment covering the White House?
You know, I'm not sure that I can pin my sights on a specific moment that I thought was my favorite, but there have been many moving moments that I've covered. I remember once being in Ukraine with Bill Clinton when he went to Babi Yar, which is the cemetery for 100,000 Nazi war dead during World War II. And it was the president and first lady tossed flowers into the open pit that had served as a grave. It was very moving. And there are lots of historic moments like that that you only get to see when you cover this beat.
Mark, thanks very much, and thank you for watching Washington Unplugged. You can join us again tomorrow on CBSNews.com. I'm Bill Plante. Have a great day.
If we don't expand our imagination,
Justification for being what you are.